We have natural immunities to change. And if we could understand what those are, we are going to be in a position to actually relate to them in a very different way.
In this episode of Wisdom, Wealth, and Wellness, host Jonathan Satovsky interviews Harvard professor Lisa Lahey, co-creator of the Immunity to Change framework. They discuss why personal and organizational change is so challenging, even with strong motivation. Lisa explains how uncovering hidden mindsets can help overcome resistance to change.
Welcome to this episode of Wisdom, Wealth, and Wellness. This is John Satovsky, your host, and today I'm speaking with Lisa Lahey. She is an incredible person, but academically, she's a Harvard graduate, School of Education faculty member who has built just a fascinating body of work to help learners and leaders overcome the innate human aversion to change. Lisa Lahey is the founder of Minds at Work, a coaching and consulting firm serving businesses and institutions around the world. She's an expert in adult development. I know you thought you stopped learning once you're done with school, but no, adult development is a real thing. An experienced educator and executive coach. Lisa works with leaders, leadership teams in both for-profit and nonprofit organizations. She currently leads and teaches the Personal Mastery Program in Harvard's Education Leadership Organizations and Entrepreneurship Program. Lisa and longtime collaborator Robert Keegan are credited with breakthrough discovery on the immunity to change. Just to say that again, because everyone might experience this. Immunity to change. Everyone experiences that. So a dynamic which impedes personal and organizational transformation. Her work helps people to close the gap between their good intentions and their behaviors. Thanks for coming.
Pleasure to be here, Jonathan. Good to see you again.
Oh, good to see you. I had the great pleasure of hearing you speak and was just fascinated by your work and your approach and your perspective on things. So I'm excited for this conversation. Let's start with the idea of immunity to change, because I think it's interesting, like the idea the new year starts, people make, okay, it's a new year. I'm going to lose 20 pounds. I'm going to go on a diet. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Okay. So I had read that a recent study showed that when doctors tell heart patients they'll die if they don't change their habits, only 1 in 7 people will be able to follow through successfully. And desire and motivation aren't enough, even when it's literally a matter of life and death. I mean, it's just such a mind-blowing thing. The ability to change remains maddeningly elusive. And this is from, I think, your book description. So why is change so elusive?
There are so many contributing factors to why change is hard. But the reason that study is particularly interesting is because you do have some of the key conditions people would say are really essential for change to happen, like high urgency, right? You can't get more urgent than you're literally going to die if you don't make certain changes. You also have in place in that situation very clear kind of indicators of what you've got to do differently. You need to lose weight. You need to stop smoking. You need to exercise more. So it's not a mystery, which sometimes it is hard to know, well, what am I supposed to do? Is very clear here what it is that you need to do. So that's why that data is particularly significant, because it does speak to, well, that obviously is not enough in order to create change. So why is it that change is so hard? My own take on this is because we have a default model of change, and I've seen this across the world, which is some version of the just do it model of change, which is we kind of summon up our willpower. We make a commitment to ourselves. We are going to actually make the change this time. And we just pump ourselves up, which is important, but it's not enough to just go at it directly to change our behaviors. And I think that is part of the problem, which is that we have a pretty simplistic understanding of how change happens, which is, oh, I see I need to lose weight. oh, let me just cut my calories. I know how to do that. And that is pretty straightforward. On the other hand, what happens typically is people are able to lose weight going on a diet. The problem is that they don't maintain the weight loss and it comes back and actually then some. So
Mm.
what turns out to look so simple is often not. And I would say that the statistic that you just referenced, maybe for that one person out of 7, it was losing weight was what I would call a technical problem. But for most people, if they could change their habit by just going at the habit directly, they would have done so already. This isn't the first time that they have been, oh, gee, I really need to take better care of my body. They probably have tried to make these changes before, but there's something else that's going on. And my own take on this is it's stuff that's going on inside of us. And I call that our inner landscape. And our inner landscape is composed of values and loyalties and things that are often quite hidden for us. And that is also part of our inner landscape, which is our unconscious drives. So here I'm just going to very simply draw on what I think is a really powerful contributing statement that one of my colleagues at the Harvard Kennedy School brings to the change literature. This is Ron Heifetz, and he says the single biggest mistake leaders make is treating adaptive challenges like technical ones. And that's what's going on in this situation. People are treating the need to change their diet, their exercise, stop smoking as just a technical when there is something adaptive. And the adaptive for shorthand is what I'm saying is all that inner stuff, our loyalties, our belief systems, that kind of thing. So let me just pause there and see if that's getting to respond to your question.
It does resonate quite a bit because actually, personally, my own father had cardiovascular disease at 38, and he's fortunately still alive almost 40 years later. And in my own research about health in the last decade or two, I learned about eating a plant-based diet could potentially reverse the degenerative characteristics of cardiovascular disease and open up the arteries. So I had suggested it to him, and he was so opposed to it for a decade. And finally, I got him to try it for a little bit, and he complained every day to me of what torture it was. I'm not sure whether he stuck with it, but it took 10 years to convince him. And I showed him studies and research, and it's fascinating. So I didn't have the toolkit to influence his change. And so, how do you increase? I guess the simple question is, everyone, because of their value system, might be different, but what tools and techniques or tactics do you have to be able to influence the 6 out of 7 people that aren't amenable to change to consider adopting new habits?
Well, 2 things I want to distinguish between, and I'm going to draw on what you just shared about your father, which is if somebody doesn't want to make the change, that's a whole different consideration than how do you help somebody who actually does want to make the change. And what the immunity to change model does is it helps definitely with the latter. It is not going to help influence people to get to a place where your father might say, for example, okay, I am committed to actually shifting my diet to more of a plant-based one. That, I think, could be there are a lot of people who talk about how you can do that, but that's not my expertise. I have ideas about how to do that, but I'd want to focus here on the thing I really feel like we know a lot about, which is you can have people who are genuinely committed, just use that as an example, to, shifting their diet to a more wholesome one. They really want to do it. They're sold, right? And yet it's still very difficult for them to make the change. They may make certain sorts of strides, but ultimately, for many people, it will still come back to kind of this rubber band effect of they're back to the way that they craved whatever they craved, and they cave into the things that they want to eat. Now, why is that? So you're asking me, can we help people with that? And the answer is, my answer is yes, by using the immunity to change approach. And I'm going to start by saying, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
All right.
Oh.
Now you're interrupting.
No, I
Now I'm
apologize.
interrupting. Such excitement.
We'll get a little cut. Well, this will edit. Yeah.
Then I'll cough here. Okay, so the immunity to change model, I want to start off by saying, in some respects, that phrase, immunity to change, is such a discouraging one. Like, you're telling me I'm immune to change. Well, okay, great. Now I have permission to just forget about it all. And I want to say that is not what the model is saying. Basically, it's saying we have natural immunities to change. And if we could understand what those are, we are going to be in a position to actually relate to them in a very different way. And it is an empowering way to understand ourselves. So I just want to say that at the front. If you take up this model, it is about opening the door to your being able to create lasting, sustainable change. So that's kind of like the header for all of this.
That's awesome. I did read, based on 30 years of adult developmental research, immunity to change is, as described by you and your co-author, Robert Keegan, a way of helping people take a kind of mental X-ray, a picture of your own mindset, allowing people to see the ways in which your mental system may actually be in some ways making errors or distortions that keep you from letting new ideas come into your head, which in fact can allow you to change your behavior. So
exactly,
it's such a beautiful thing, your ability to be able to shine that mirror for people.
Yes. Yeah. You want me to go through like an example there?
Well, so, I think, as you said, there are many decades in your research and your development programs. What are we still missing,
Well, I think what we are missing is that people don't know how to do this adaptive work. And most people don't know about how to use the immunity to change model to really help them see that inner landscape stuff. Because the bottom line is that's what we're missing, that when the inner landscape stuff has to change in order to create sustained behavior change. Most people have a pretty kind of, as I'm saying, like they're oriented to their willpower. Like, if I can't change, it must be because I didn't really mean it, or I don't really care enough. And what this model is saying is maybe that's true, but it's more likely that you're not using a sufficiently complex, in the simple way though, approach to how to create the change for yourself. You're just trying to do the really simplest thing, which is to try to change your behavior straight up. And I would say, if you can just straight up change your behavior, don't drink that extra beer. Don't open that bag of potato chips. If you can do that, great. But if you can't, that's an indicator that the willpower piece is not going to serve you ultimately. And then I would encourage you to do an immunity to change map, so you can see what is that inner landscape thing that's going on that you need to address in order to change your behavior.
It's fascinating, because I think what strikes me is the idea that some people want to be self-reflected and look in the mirror, and maybe the predisposition to that immunity is someone not wanting a mirror shined. It's like constructive criticism. People shut down immediately when all of a sudden you say something, which leads to your future. The next book, which I loved, which talks about at every one culture and every one organization, and you talk about deliberately developmental organizations. So I mean, just the concept of deliberately developmental organizations is awesome. And I'm dreaming about having that influence beyond the organization to the entire ecosystem. And what I mean there is, okay, I'm willing to be self-reflected, look in the mirror, the immunity to change, which helps me develop. I get my leadership team to buy into looking in the mirror, self-reflection, and deliberate developmental growth for themselves and the collective conscience of the entire team. I would dream of expanding it to the consumer as well, because as you know, I'm in the wealth management field, and whether it's delayed gratification, saving for their future selves, people need to visualize why it's so important to be self-reflectant. Why is it so important to deliberately recognize their blind spots that's preventing them from actually getting what they want in all aspects of their lives? So I wonder if you have seen the impact and influence beyond just the leadership team to the team and to the clients and to people in the entire ecosystem. Have you seen an influence and impact there as possible, or it really takes like a lot of effort?
Yes, yes. Well, I'm thinking about one of the deliberately developmental organizations we looked at is called Next Jump. And one of the things they've done is have sought to bring DDO, I'm saying for shorthand, deliberately developmental organization, ideas, concepts, and practices to other organizations that have sought to learn from them. So they have more of like a permeable boundary around how they conceptualize who the us is. That's the only place actually that I'm aware of. But, I do think that when I think about your business, it's I could imagine that your customers could very much, is that the word you use, or do you say clients?
Well, they're mostly family and friends and people I love and people I care about. So, I mean,
Yes.
I view it more personally than business. But
Yeah.
the simple idea that comes to mind is, someone gets a lump sum of money and they need to put that money to work so that they can replace their income when they stop working, and they get analysis paralysis, the news, the headlines. There's so many things that prevent people from the habits they need, whether it's health or financial health, physical health or financial health. I
Yes.
think the mental awareness of what's blocking them and the ability for the team around me to coach people into seeing the mirror for their
Yes.
own benefit.
Yes. So thinking about your friends, your family as part of your ecosystem, I think it could be very high value for people to understand exactly what you're saying, that there are some blind spots, and those blind spots, once seen, the thing for many people, they have a fear of their blind spots, like they're going to discover something that's really unlikable and pleasant, something they're just going to kind of feel allergic to. The thing I believe people don't recognize is that whether we see these blind spots or not, they are still very active. And when they're active, they are getting in our way. And so we're actually blind to both the blind spot and to the ways it is actually the source of how we are making bad choices. So if you back up and you can help people to imagine that it's kind of like inviting people to have a friendlier relationship to the fact that they are human beings who have certain anxieties and worries and ways they want to be taking care of themselves and seeing themselves in the world. And I don't know, I'm going to make this up about just financial security, that people could feel like it's too hard for them to make choices about how to invest because right now I feel like, oh, I could value using that money in order to feel more comfortable. And they could go through some very unconscious process that's a little bit like, I don't know when I'm going to die. Why not live like the best life I can right now, without recognizing that that is in part a driver for them, that there's a set of beliefs they're holding about what it means to actually be taking care of themselves, that if they could see what it really means for them, they might be in a more have a more open stance towards investigating, does it actually have to be like that? Can I both attend to the long term and the short term simultaneously? Like that's a
Yeah.
cognitive thing. Many people are thinking it's one or the other. And, we tend not to think about these sorts of cognitive distortions.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's a it's a lifelong process. The deliberately developmental and awareness about immunity to change is a lifelong process. And I want to get to COVID a bit and how this has changed things. But I was thinking about the tie between finances and health. One of your Harvard colleagues had talked about, Dr. Herbert Benson had talked about how 70 to 90% of ailments are stress related. Our health um, is impacted by our mental state of mind. It's kind of fascinating, and people aren't aware of that. They're not self-aware of the connection there. And for me, recognizing that stress is a high component of people's financial security or insecurity of wanting to accumulate money or protect their money, whatever it is.
Yes.
It's all tied together. That's hence the wisdom, wealth, and wellness. But so I live it at a beautiful thing. Anyway, I'm tying into, recently co-hosted a 2-part webinar from Robert Keegan titled The COVID Crisis and Adult Development. One of the takeaways was you start with yourself and you acknowledge where you are and how you feel. And our emotional life is informed by our individual developmental perspective. Some of us may be self-authoring, recognizing that our identity exists outside of our relationships and emotions, while others may have a socialized perspective, defining the self through relationships and emotions. Can you tell me more about the importance of self-authoring versus socialized, and how does a leader identify which perspective someone on their team has in order to help develop them?
Yeah. So I'll start with saying that a socialized worldview is one where myself is defined by meeting the expectations of significant others external to me. And for shorthand, I would call this being a good girl, a good boy, a good person. And that sense of what goodness is externally defined.
Right.
One of the ways that we can be aware when we're listening to somebody else of that perhaps being their meaning-making system, just perhaps a hypothesis, is when they keep looking to us to give them approval for what it is that they've done. That when we turn to them and ask them to do kind of like an assessment of the quality of what it is that they've just come up with, they may very much struggle with that. They may need to be drawing on, well, what are the criteria you're asking me to be using? And they want to basically be operating as best as they can within the confines of what somebody else is saying. Well, that's what high quality is. It's a very risky thing to disagree with others because you will risk losing the connection and sense of like belonging. So those are some telltales of the possibility. I will say it's not an easy thing, and I wouldn't want it to be easy to see how to assess where somebody is developmentally. You really would need to do quite a bit of studying about that because we don't want to pigeonhole people. But that's a good thing to be paying attention to. How much do you feel like people are in pure compliance mode with what you're asking them? Because even if they might be further along in their development, you are, in fact, as a leader, overfeeding the need for people to keep being compliant when you keep telling them what to do. So I would say that's something for a leader to be aware of, which is how am I unwittingly creating the circumstances where people will keep looking outside of themselves in order to know what the right thing to do is here.
Interesting.
When we make sense of the world more from a self-authoring perspective, we are the originators of defining what is quality here. What's the thing I was really trying to accomplish here? And how was I going about doing it? It's important for us to have a shared sense of what goodness is. And if we differ on that, I will, as a self-authoring perspective, want to make sure we can come to some kind of, can we agree where there's some degrees of latitude here? And basically I'm able to go about my business. I don't keep needing to be checking in with you to find out, how am I doing? How am I doing? I am providing my own source of information about that. I may need to gather data from outside myself in order to make that assessment, but fundamentally the assessment rests inside of me. So that's more of a self-authoring. And I will say, to just try to clear what is often a misconception about these two different worldviews or ways of making meaning. Sometimes people conflate relationships with more of a socialized worldview and more of like a analytic and work thing with self-authoring, and that is not true. It has more to do with where the locus of sense-making and set of principles for what constitutes goodness is coming from. And I'd also say it's not an either or button sort of, switch that gets, you just put up, okay, now one day I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be self-authoring. There's a lot of adults that spend the majority of their time in the transition between those two different meaning-making systems.
I love that concept. And I think of, like, oftentimes someone needs to Jedi themselves, They have to be willing to look down at themselves and how they're showing up and how they're responding to situations. So it leads me to the thought that, what are examples of self-talk that people have in their mind, or someone who is able to positively change compared to those who can't? For example, around a difficulty to be patient in meetings, or to stop procrastinating. What do you think? What kind of language is most helpful?
Well, I think here's a place where it's easy to slip into, oh, if I only talk to myself in a certain way, I'll be able to make the change. And self-talk, in a way, is a behavior. How I talk to myself, same way it's a behavior when I talk to you. I think the key, from my own perspective, holding this notion of immunity, to really needing to understand your immunity to change, is when you do seek to engage in positive self-talk, you want to be tracking, what is that telling me about the accuracy of some big assumption I hold? So, we didn't go through the immunity to change process, but ultimately it ends in somebody identifying a set of big assumptions they hold that are limiting them, that are keeping them being a smaller self. And if I can identify that, for example, I hold assumption that I don't have what it takes in order to be self-disciplined. Let's just say that when I go through an immunity to change mapping process, that's what gets revealed. Then I might say to myself, how can I test that and find out the ways in which that's not accurate? Well, one of the ways I might test it is I'm going to start employing a strategy of self-talk. And every time I catch myself going down a place where I start feeling bad, I am going to use that as a trigger to use a kind of self-talk I've already kind of planned. I have a kind of a set of things I'm going to say to myself, which is, you can do this. Look for what's in your control. Let's just say that's my self-talk. That would be an example of something, if in the moment I'm recognizing, here's when I wanted to use that self-talk. Now let me see what happens when I do use that self-talk. And I'm learning where to discern where my control place is. Then I'm starting to learn about the the inaccuracy of my big assumption, which told me, I don't have there's nothing I can do to actually change that. But I'm beginning to see, actually, I can see that when I use that strategy, it makes a difference, a positive difference. And that's how I start learning that my big assumption is not accurate. And I start being able to reconfigure my belief system to be more based on reality of what happens when I'm using that self-talk. So the key thing I want to say here is that if I was to say to you, here, go use this self-talk message and believe you're going to change, I've just fallen right back into the just do it model. What I want to be helping you and others listening to understand is that if you do want to use that self-talk as a way of testing a big assumption, great. That's how you're going to really lead yourself to change, because you're changing your mind ultimately about what is in your control. Does that make sense?
I do. I like it a lot. I think where people perhaps get stuck is the concept of cause and effect. Excuse me, cause and effect, as well as patience of the time of the cause and effect of the change in action to actually take hold.
Yes.
So anyway, you're yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
I just couldn't emphasize that more. You really need to have patience with this, because the belief system you hold, let's say it is a belief about, I don't have what it takes. That belief has been residing inside of you for probably decades, right? It's not a new thing. So just think about how wired that part of your brain is.
Yeah, I mentioned to people when they say I can't do something, I said, change it from can't to yet.
Yeah, that's
yet.
Yeah.
You can't is a limiting belief, but you can do it if it's taught to you, if you spend the time on it, if you have the will, skill, and time to, an effort that you put in. You can change it. You haven't been able to do it yet. Everything is yet. It changes the focus and perspective. Anyway, you're teaching a class. I think you've been generous with your time. I don't want to overextend this conversation. I can go on for days, but you're teaching a class at a Harvard course called Practicing Leadership Inside and Out. In the end of the semester, if your students could walk away with one or two ideas, actionable ideas that they can, adopt in their lives, what would you suggest that they would be?
I am going to pick up on one of the things you just said, which I think is an extremely powerful, potent idea, which is the notion of yet. And this fundamentally is like the distinction between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And I want students to recognize that they have the capacity to actually learn much more than they believe they can. And that if they are willing to allow themselves the experience of seeing, I guess, I don't know how to simply say this.
I got an idea for you. My idea is changing the frame. It's just neurolinguistics, like the word impossible is I'm possible. I am possible. Like impossible doesn't mean it's impossible. Anything that you think is impossible is a limiting belief. If you just reframe the way you think about the wording, I can make it possible. I am, whatever someone says can't do something, I'm going to figure a way to do it,
Yes, I can make it possible.
Yeah.
And to basically be learning what are the ways that you can systematically create the conditions where you can actually show yourself that you can do things. So some of it is what I want them to walk away with is really understanding that our limiting beliefs are extremely limiting us, and that they have a lot of control over us unless we take more control. And that's what the whole process of being able to see your immune system is about, being able to actually step outside of yourself to be able to see, oh, that's a belief I'm holding. And now that I can see the belief, this is like, I don't know. Tell me if this makes sense.
No, it's good.
This is the difference between when my limiting belief is in play, I have my glasses on and I see the world through those glasses. When I'm actually able to take my glasses off and take a look at them, that is like an amazing shift, that I can actually now take a look at these and I can be more objective about my lens. I can ask questions about it. I can see how distorted it may be. As long as my lenses are up here, I will believe they're true. They will continue to limit me. So it's that big move. That's the key thing I want them to understand. When we're subject to things, we are limiting ourselves. When we can learn how to take things as object, we are in a position where we have a lot more choices. That's one thing I want them to learn. The other big thing is that I want them to recognize that their emotional regulation as leaders, so I teach it's a leadership program, is absolutely essential to them being able to win the hearts and minds of people, and that they actually have a lot more potential to control that. And one of the key anchors in our time together is this quote: between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies your freedom. A quote often attributed to Frankl. I don't know if that's true, but that space turns out to be, for most people, like stimulus, response, boom. Most of us are very skilled at being reactive. And what I want people to learn is around emotional regulation, how to create that space and how to see different choices. And in the process, be able to learn more about how you've got capacities you didn't even know you had.
Brilliant. I love that. That is just such a great closing. That Viktor Frankl quote is just precious. I love it. So thanks again for spending the time. You've been immensely generous. Sorry for a little technical challenges, that we were able to overcome. Adaptable to change,
Yeah.
Anyway, so subscribe free to Wisdom, Wealth, and Wellness anywhere you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. And the links are in the show notes and at satovsky.com/podcast. And if you want to adopt this practice of deliberately developmental in your financial life, you could talk to one of the one of the financial advisors at Satovsky Asset Management. So click on Get in Touch. Anyway, have a wonderful day and look forward to seeing you soon, Lisa. Thank you.
Be well.
At Satovsky Asset Management, we believe refined wealth deserves refined service. As fiduciaries, our mission is to protect and grow your wealth through disciplined advice, hyper-personal service, and multi-generational trust. Our clients stay because we never oversell. We simply overdeliver.